They reminded me of quantum formulas I'd seen during my research, but more complex, symbols I didn't recognize interspersed with the familiar. Time became meaningless underground. My phone still worked as a clock, but with no natural light, the hours blurred together. I slept when exhaustion overtook me, waking to the same unchanging darkness. The only sounds were the distant rumble of trains passing on active lines far above and the occasional skittering of small creatures in the walls. On what my phone claimed was the third day, I heard something new, footsteps, too measured and deliberate to be rats. I extinguished my light and pressed myself into a corner, breath shallow, heart pounding so loudly I was certain it would give me away. The footsteps passed my hiding place, paused, then continued. I caught a glimpse through a crack in the door, a figure that seemed to absorb light rather than be illuminated by it, moving with a fluid grace that no human could achieve. I remained motionless until long after the sound had faded. My phone lit up with a message, asterisk they're searching the boundaries. Stay hidden, asterisk then, moments later, asterisk I found a solution. We can't stay separated forever. But we can reintegrate, asterisk how? I typed, fingers clumsy with fear. Asterisk the breach goes both ways. I can pull you through, or push myself into your reality. But the transition would be, difficult, asterisk difficult how, asterisk our consciousness would merge. Two sets of memories, experiences, knowledge. Most people's minds fracture under the strain, asterisk I considered the alternative, remaining in this limbo indefinitely, hunted by entities I barely understood. What do I do? Asterisk find the central platform. There's a maintenance access panel with a red lever. When you pull it, focus on the accident, the memory you've been avoiding. It will create a quantum resonance between us, asterisk it took hours of careful movement through the darkness to find the platform. The access panel was exactly where he said it would be, hidden behind a defunct ticket booth. The lever inside was cold to the touch, resistant as I gripped it with both hands. I closed my eyes and allowed the suppressed memories to surface, the laboratory, the humming machine, the sudden flash of light that seemed to tear reality itself. I remembered my other life, my work, my knowledge. As I pulled the lever down, electricity arced from the panel, enveloping me in blue-white light. Pain lanced through my skull as two sets of memories fought for dominance, childhood in Boston versus growing up in Chicago, studying literature versus quantum physics, relationships with different people who had never existed in the other's world. For a moment that stretched into eternity, I was everywhere and nowhere, everyone and no one. When consciousness returned, I found myself lying on my apartment floor, phone clutched in my hand. The screen showed a message thread with my own number, but now I could see both sides of the conversation, what I had sent and what I had received. Both were mine. Both had always been mine. I stood on shaky legs and approached the covered bathroom mirror. With trembling fingers, I pulled down the sheet. My reflection stared back, but now I recognized it fully. The subtle wrongness I perceived was just the disconnection between my fractured selves. My phone buzzed one final time. My number, our number, with a simple message, asterisk we're whole now. But the boundary remains torn. Others might find their way through, asterisk I glanced at my window, where the night sky appeared normal, stars visible between city buildings. No aurora, no visible breach. But I knew better now. Reality was thinner than anyone suspected, more permeable. And somewhere beyond the veil, the guardians were still searching. I turned away from the window and began removing the sheets from all my mirrors. I would need to see clearly from now on. After all, I knew exactly what to watch for. I still feel it sometimes, that peculiar numbness that creeps from my jaw and spreads across my face like spilled ink on paper. It wasn't the typical dental anesthetic that wears off in hours. This sensation returns periodically, always at night, always when I'm alone, accompanied by the subtle metallic taste that floods my mouth. And when it happens, I know with absolute certainty that what I experienced was real, despite all evidence to the contrary. The pain started on a Tuesday, a dull throb that originated somewhere deep in my molar and gradually intensified until it became impossible to ignore. By Wednesday morning, the side of my face had swollen, and focusing on work became an exercise in futility between winces. I mentioned my predicament to Davis, a colleague I knew only through brief interactions in the break room, not someone I typically seek advice from. But desperation has a way of lowering standards. Davis's eyes lit up with unexpected enthusiasm. He scribbled an address on a post-it note, slid it across the table, and assured me that this dentist had performed miracles on his impacted wisdom tooth last year. The location seemed unusual, some office building in Havenbrook, a neighborhood on the outskirts of town where development had stalled after the economic downturn. I'd rarely ventured there, but the pain pulsing through my jaw eliminated any hesitation. That afternoon, I called in sick for the remainder of the day and drove across town. The roads grew narrower as I navigated through Havenbrook, passing shuttered storefronts and apartment complexes with more vacancy signs than occupied units. Fall had descended early that year, and a thin layer of mist hung over the streets, softening the edges of buildings and blurring traffic lights into hazy orbs. The address led me to a 10-story commercial building with a facade of smudged glass and weather-stained concrete. Unlike the surrounding decay, this structure maintained a peculiar dignity, as if existing in defiance of its deteriorating neighborhood. Inside, the lobby smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. A directory board with missing letters displayed the building's occupants, law offices, accounting firms, a travel agency that likely hadn't booked a vacation since the internet took over, and there it was, Nightingale Dental Associates, Suite 813. The elevator ascended with mechanical reluctance, each floor marked by a subtle jolt. When the doors finally slid open on the 8th floor, I stepped into a hallway that stretched in both directions, lined with identical brown doors and illuminated by fluorescent lights that hummed like trapped insects. Suite 813 waited at the end of the corridor, past several vacant offices with darkened windows. I hesitated at the door, my pain momentarily eclipsed by an inexplicable apprehension. Something about the building's emptiness, the echo of my footsteps on the tiled floor, the peculiar stillness of the air, it all felt wrong somehow. But the throbbing in my jaw quickly reminded me why I had come. The dental office defied my expectations. Behind that unremarkable door lay an immaculate reception area with soft lighting and comfortable furniture. The walls were painted a soothing shade of blue, adorned with framed landscapes of serene mountain vistas. Soft classical music drifted from concealed speakers. The contrast with the dreary hallway outside was so stark that crossing the threshold felt like stepping into another world entirely. A receptionist looked up from her computer and smiled. Her face was pleasant but somehow forgettable, as if deliberately designed not to leave an impression. She checked my name against an appointment book, though I didn't recall making an appointment, and informed me with practiced efficiency that Dr. Nightingale could see me immediately. The waiting room remained empty save for myself, yet magazines were fanned out on side tables as if recently disturbed by other patients. She directed me down a short hallway to examination room 3. The dental chair faced a window overlooking the city, though the view seemed oddly unfamiliar from this vantage point, as if the building were taller than I had initially perceived. Dr. Nightingale entered moments later, his movements fluid and precise, his handshake firm but cold. His features were sharp and angular, high cheekbones, prominent jawline, deep-set eyes that reflected the overhead lights like polished obsidian. He examined my infected tooth with such gentle precision that I barely felt his instruments probing the sensitive area. His diagnosis came swiftly, an abscess requiring immediate drainage, followed by root canal therapy. The procedure could be performed right away, he assured me, his voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't quite place, something European, perhaps, or possibly Canadian, softening the consonants in a way that made his words sound almost melodic. I should have asked questions, about insurance, about credentials, about how Davis had found this place. Instead, I nodded eagerly, desperate for relief. The injection of anesthetic brought immediate numbness, spreading beyond the typical boundaries of dental work, creeping down my neck and across my shoulder. Dr. Nightingale worked methodically, his movements becoming increasingly blurred as whatever he had administered took stronger hold. The ceiling above me transformed under my drug-hazed gaze, the fluorescent panels seemed to pulse and shift, revealing glimpses of something else behind them, intricate patterns that appeared almost organic, like the branching of veins or the spread of roots. The classical music warped subtly, individual notes stretching beyond their natural duration. I tried to focus on the cityscape through the window, but even that had changed, buildings standing at impossible angles against a sky that had deepened to an unnatural indigo despite the early hour. Dr. Nightingale spoke occasionally, his words reaching me as if through water, something about exceptional conditions, about rare anatomical anomalies, about my tooth being particularly interesting. I felt pressure but no pain as he worked, and despite my growing unease, I remained perfectly still, my body no longer responding to my mounting anxiety. The procedure ended abruptly. Dr. Nightingale stepped back, removed his gloves with a crisp snap, and pronounced the treatment complete. The receptionist returned, helped me to my feet when it became clear my balance was compromised, and provided aftercare instructions printed on heavy, cream-colored paper with an elegant letterhead. I was to return in 7 days for a follow-up assessment. The numbness would subside within hours, she assured me, though certain sensations might persist longer due to the nature of the treatment. I left the building in a daze, the setting sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. The drive home remained a blur in my memory, marked by wrong turns and near misses at intersections. That night, I slept deeply and dreamlessly, waking the next morning with only a dull ache where the fierce pain had been. The week passed uneventfully. The infection appeared to have cleared, and I returned to work, mentioning my successful treatment to Davis in passing. He nodded distractedly, immersed in a spreadsheet, and made no acknowledgement of his recommendation. I attributed his lack of response to workplace stress and thought nothing more of it. On the 7th day, I returned to the building for my follow-up appointment. The lobby looked shabbier than I remembered, the floor tiles cracked in places, dust gathering in corners. The directory board showed no listing for Nightingale Dental Associates. Confused, I approached the security guard station behind a desk I hadn't noticed during my previous visit. According to him, there had never been a dental office in the building, certainly not in the last decade he'd worked there. Suite 813, he informed me with growing impatience, had been vacant since the previous tenant, a small accounting firm, had gone bankrupt 3 years earlier. I insisted I had been there just 1 week ago, but my protests only earned me suspicious glances and eventually a suggestion that I might want to check my records again. Determined to prove I wasn't losing my mind, I took the elevator to the 8th floor. The hallway appeared narrower, darker, and considerably more dilapidated than I remembered. Emergency lights cast a jaundiced glow over peeling wallpaper and stained carpet. Suite 813's door was secured with a heavy padlock, rust accumulating around its edges. Through the clouded glass panel, I could make out an empty room with dust-covered floors and water stains spreading across the ceiling like invasive mold. It clearly hadn't been occupied for years. My heart raced as I pressed my face against the glass, desperately searching for any sign of the immaculate office I had visited. The taste of metal filled my mouth, and my recently treated tooth began to throb in perfect synchronization with my pulse. I stumbled back from the door, my reflection in the glass momentarily transforming into something unfamiliar, sharper features, deeper set eyes, a smile that stretched too wide. Back at work the next day, I confronted Davis about the referral. He looked at me with genuine confusion, then concern, as I described the mysteriously vanished dental office. He swore he had never given me an address, had never recommended a dentist, and suggested, with the careful tone people use when they fear someone might be unstable, that perhaps I should consider talking to someone professional about my experience. I tried to forget the incident, to rationalize it as some bizarre episode triggered by pain medication or stress. But certain details continued to haunt me, the way the cityscape from the window hadn't matched any possible view from the building's actual height and position, the unnatural coldness of Dr. Nightingale's hands, the peculiar letterhead on my aftercare instructions, which I could no longer find despite tearing apart my apartment in search of them. 3 weeks later, I noticed something when flossing, a small, hard object lodged in the gum beside my treated tooth. Using tweezers, I carefully extracted what appeared to be a sliver of metal, no larger than a grain of rice. Under my bathroom light, It gleamed with an unusual luster, neither silver nor gold, but something in between, inscribed with markings too tiny to decipher without magnification. That night, I dreamed of Dr. Nightingale standing over me, explaining in his melodic accent that certain patients were selected for special procedures, that my dental anatomy made me an ideal candidate for their experimental work. In the dream, he opened his own mouth to reveal teeth modified with the same metallic substance, arranged in patterns that seemed to shift and reconfigure even as I stared at them. I woke with a jolt, the familiar numbness spreading across my face. In the bathroom mirror, I examined my tooth, now aching dully. The gum around it had receded slightly, revealing what appeared to be a thin line of the same metal embedded at the base of the tooth. I ran my tongue over it, tasting copper and something else, something chemical and foreign. Over the following months, I consulted 3 different dentists. Each examined my tooth and found nothing unusual, just a standard root canal and crown performed with adequate, if unremarkable, skill. X-rays showed normal bone structure and no foreign objects. One dentist, more patient than the others, gently suggested that phantom sensations following dental work were not uncommon, particularly for patients with anxiety disorders. But I know what I felt, what I still feel when the numbness returns on random nights, accompanied now by brief bursts of what seem like transmitted thoughts, clinical observations, Dr. Nightingale's voice, descriptions of successful integration, mentions of subjects responding well to initial implantation. I've developed new habits since then. I avoid dentists entirely. I check and recheck the addresses of any medical professionals before visiting them. I've installed a small ultraviolet light in my bathroom, which I use nightly to examine my tooth, because under that specialized illumination, the crown emanates a faint, pulsing glow that no natural material should produce. Sometimes I drive past that building in Havenbrook, parking across the street to watch the 8th floor windows. Mostly they remain dark, but occasionally, always briefly, always late at night, lights flicker in Suite 813, casting angular shadows that move with unsettling precision. I've never worked up the courage to enter the building during these episodes. Part of me fears finding nothing but that empty, dusty room again. A greater part fears finding Dr. Nightingale waiting for me, instruments prepared for my next treatment. The small metal object I extracted sits in a glass vial on my nightstand. Sometimes it seems to shift position overnight, though I tell myself this is impossible. Twice I've tried to show it to others, but on both occasions, the vial appeared empty when I attempted to display it, only to reveal its contents again when I was alone. Last week, I noticed Davis looking at me strangely across the office. When our eyes met, he touched his jaw in exactly the spot where my treated tooth is located, then smiled, a smile that stretched slightly too wide, revealing teeth that caught the fluorescent lights with an unnatural gleam. He hasn't acknowledged the gesture since, responding with blank confusion when I carefully asked if his dental work had been done locally. I know how this sounds. I understand why no one believes me. But something happened in that dental chair in Suite 813, something beyond conventional explanation. Something was placed inside me, or perhaps something was awakened. And it remains there still, pulsing beneath the artificial crown, sending its signals to recipients I can only guess at. The most terrifying aspect isn't the possibility that I imagined everything, it's the growing certainty that I didn't. And the question of how many others like me are out there, carrying these small metallic seeds behind their perfect smiles, waiting for whatever harvest Dr. Nightingale and his associates have planned. Tonight, my tooth is throbbing again. Through my bathroom window, I can see the lights of the city, and somewhere among them, the building in Havenbrook. I wonder if Suite 813 is illuminated now, if Dr. Nightingale is. The fluorescent lights in the Harmon Business Center flickered with an unnatural rhythm, casting sickly shadows across the 4th floor hallway. The constant electrical hum that permeated the building seemed to deepen as I approached the end of the corridor, clipboard in hand. Something about this place had felt wrong from the moment I'd accepted the contract to assess the commercial property, not wrong in any way I could articulate, just a persistent, gnawing wrongness that settled in the pit of my stomach and refused to dissipate. My name is Michael Reeves, Commercial Property Assessor for Westlake County. I've spent 15 years evaluating office spaces, retail locations, and industrial properties. I know buildings. I understand their logic, their patterns, their secrets. At least, I thought I did before I encountered Office 408A. It began 3 weeks ago when I received the assignment to conduct a comprehensive assessment of the Harmon Business Center, a 12-story structure built in the late 1980s. The work was straightforward: verify occupancy, document maintenance issues, assess market values, and update the county's property database. I'd received spreadsheets listing all tenants, floor plans showing every office, and security access to the entire building. The assessment progressed smoothly through the first 3 floors. But when I reached the 4th floor and began cross-referencing my tenant list with the actual offices, I noticed a discrepancy. My system showed every office from 401 to 424, except for a mysterious 408A. According to the official floor plan, there was only 408, no 408A. I assumed it was a clerical error and continued my work. That Friday afternoon, I was finishing my inspection of the 4th floor when I noticed something odd. The main corridor made a sharp right turn at the end, leading to a short hallway that wasn't clearly marked on my floor plan. Following it, I discovered a door with a small, tarnished plaque reading 408A in faded lettering. The inconsistency triggered my professional curiosity. This office existed physically but not in any of the official records. I tried the handle, finding it locked. Pressing my ear against the door, I detected no sound from within. Not even the omnipresent hum of the building's ventilation system seemed to penetrate this space. I knocked, receiving no response. Something about the door's texture felt wrong against my knuckles, not quite solid, not quite hollow. I made a note to return with a building manager. The strange office nagged at me throughout the weekend. Monday morning, I requested the complete architectural plans from the county archives and spent hours reviewing them. According to every document, the hallway ended at Office 408. There was no turn, no extension, no 408A. Yet I had seen it, touched it. When I returned to the 4th floor the following week, I experienced the first real shock. The corridor ended exactly as the plans indicated, with a blank wall where I distinctly remembered seeing the right turn and hallway extension. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat as cold sweat beaded on my forehead. I approached the wall, running my hands over its surface. It was solid drywall, painted the same institutional beige as the rest of the building, with no indication that a hallway had ever existed there. I asked the receptionist at the insurance office across the hall if she knew anything about Office 408A. She looked at me with genuine confusion, stating firmly that the hallway had always ended at that wall. When I described the short extension corridor and the door I'd seen, she suggested I might have confused this floor with another building. Her certainty and the conviction in her eyes made my stomach tighten. I thanked her and left, my hands trembling slightly as I made notes. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the memory of seeing that door, touching it, feeling its strange texture beneath my fingers. I'd been doing this job for 15 years. I didn't confuse buildings. I didn't imagine doors. 3 days later, I was driving past the Harmon Business Center around 9:30 p.m., having finished a late assessment at a nearby property. Almost without conscious decision, I pulled into the parking garage. The night security guard recognized me from my previous visits and allowed me upstairs after I explained I needed to check something for an urgent report due the next morning. The building felt different at night. The fluorescent lights hummed at a lower, more menacing frequency. The normal bustle of office activity was replaced by a silence so complete it seemed to press against my eardrums. The elevator carried me to the 4th floor with a jerky motion that felt deliberate, threatening. When the doors opened, I hesitated before stepping out. The hallway stretched before me, identical to how I remembered it from my daytime visits, yet somehow altered. The shadows seemed deeper, the corners less defined. I walked slowly toward the end of the corridor, my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the empty space. And there it was, the right turn at the end of the hallway, the extension corridor, the door marked 408A. My heart hammered against my rib cage as I approached. The door looked older somehow, the wood more weathered, the metal plaque more tarnished than I remembered. The air in the small hallway felt dense, resistant, as if I were moving through water rather than air. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I reached for my phone to document what I was seeing. I activated the camera and began recording, narrating in a whisper that sounded strange and disconnected from my body. As I approached the door, the image on my phone screen began to distort. Vertical lines cut through the picture, and the audio became a staticky mess of white noise and discordant tones. When I touched the door, the screen went completely black, though the recording indicator showed it was still running. The handle felt ice cold against my palm, sending a jolt of pain up my arm. It turned easily this time, and the door swung inward with no resistance. The opening revealed only darkness, not the absence of light, but a tangible darkness that seemed to absorb the hallway illumination at its edges. Standing at the threshold, I felt a pressure differential, as if the space beyond the door was drawing air from the corridor. That's when I heard it, a sound from within the darkness, not a voice, not machinery, but something between a whisper and the rustle of paper. It conveyed intention without words, awareness without presence. My skin erupted in goosebumps, and a wave of nausea crashed over me. Every instinct screamed for retreat. I backed away, watching as the darkness seemed to seep around the edges of the door frame like black smoke. The door remained open, an invitation or a threat I couldn't interpret. When my back hit the opposite wall, I turned and ran, not stopping until I reached the elevator. My hand shook so violently I could barely press the button for the lobby. In the parking garage, I sat in my car for nearly an hour, trying to calm my racing heart and rationalize what I'd experienced. When I finally felt composed enough to drive, I checked my phone to review the video evidence. The recording was there, nearly 6 minutes long, but played back as visual static and a horrible screeching noise that forced me to mute my phone. The final frames showed what looked like elongated fingers reaching toward the camera before cutting to black. I told myself I needed verification, confirmation from another person that what I was experiencing was real. The next morning, I returned to the building with James, a security supervisor I'd befriended during my assessments. I explained that I needed to check something on the 4th floor but didn't elaborate on what we might find. As we walked the corridor together, I felt a creeping dread. When we approached the end, as I feared and somehow expected, the hallway terminated in the same blank wall I'd seen during my daytime visits. James looked at me with growing concern as I described the extension corridor and office 408A. The lines were pale, barely visible against my skin, but they were undeniably there. Perfectly formed, chillingly intricate. A strangled cry escaped my lips. I scrambled out of bed, stumbling towards the bathroom, desperate to wash it off. But I stopped dead in the hallway, my blood running cold. I didn't need the mirror to know. I could feel it. The slight pressure, the faint buzzing, the awareness of that intricate, wrong geometry pressed against my skin. I didn't wash it off. How could I? It wasn't on my skin, it felt like it was part of it. Today, the internet feels quieter about the pattern. Some of the original posts are gone. The merchandise links are broken. It's like someone is trying to scrub it away. But for those of us who saw it, who really saw it, it's too late. I see the pattern everywhere now, not as a coincidence, but as a fundamental structure peeking through the cracks of the world. Sometimes the lines pulse. Sometimes objects subtly shift to match its form. And the faint imprint on my arm remains, a constant, terrifying reminder. It went viral. It spread. And now, it's integrating. We invited the pattern in, mesmerized by its strangeness, and now we can't get it out. It's in the frost, in the wood grain, in the scattered papers, and now, it's on me. And I have no idea what happens next, when the pattern decides to become more than just lines on skin. The Whisper Stone. It started with the calm stones. They appeared seemingly out of nowhere, flooding online marketplaces and popping up in influencer unboxing videos. They were small, smooth, oddly weighted stones, usually a muted gray or soft blue, made of some unknown, cool-to-the-touch resin. Marketed as the ultimate fidget toy and stress reliever, their appeal was instant. #CalmStone, #PocketZen, #oddly satisfying, the hashtags exploded. Everyone seemed to have one, rolling it between their fingers during meetings, lectures, or just while scrolling through their feeds. My name is Liam. I bought one impulsively from a pop-up ad. It felt nice in my hand, cool and solid, its surface almost unnaturally smooth. It did have a strangely calming effect, focusing my restless energy as I spun it on my desk while working from home. I figured it was just a clever bit of marketing capitalizing on the fidget trend. The quiet started subtly. I live alone in a usually noisy apartment building, traffic outside, neighbors moving around, the hum of the fridge. But one evening, about a week after getting the CalmStone, I noticed the ambient sound seemed softer. Muted. I thought maybe my ears were blocked, or I was just tired. I put the stone down on my nightstand and went to bed. That night, I woke up suddenly. The room was utterly silent. Not just quiet, but a heavy, pressing absence of sound. No traffic hum, no heating system clicking, not even the sound of my own breathing seemed to echo normally. It felt like being wrapped in thick cotton. Panic tightened my chest. I sat bolt upright, straining my ears. Nothing. Then, faintly, from the direction of the nightstand, I thought I heard it, a soft, sibilant SH. Like someone whispering, trying to keep a secret. I flicked on the lamp. The CalmStone sat innocently on the wood. The whispering, if it had ever been there, was gone. The normal, low-level sounds of the apartment building slowly filtered back in, though they still felt distant. My heart was pounding. Just a weird dream, I told myself, but the unnatural silence had felt chillingly real. Over the next few days, the phenomenon repeated. Periods of unsettling quiet, followed by the perception of a faint, indecipherable whisper seemingly emanating from the stone when the silence was deepest. It wasn't recordable. I tried setting my phone next to it, but the playback revealed only normal room tone, perhaps even quieter than usual. Online, amidst the glowing reviews and pictures of CalmStones artfully arranged on desks, similar anecdotes began to surface, buried in comment sections or posted on obscure forums. Anyone else notice things get really quiet when holding their CalmStone? Swear I heard my stone whisper last night. Freaked me out. #CalmStone weird. Is it just me or does the silence feel heavy? Like it's pressing in? These posts were often dismissed as imagination, tinnitus, or people being suggestible. The company behind CalmStones issued a generic statement about the stones being made of inert, sound-dampening resin, intended to enhance focus. But the effect intensified for me. The periods of silence grew longer, sometimes lasting minutes. During these times, the whispers became slightly more defined, though never forming actual words. It sounded like hushed breaths, tiny clicks, the rustle of dry leaves, all layered together into something that felt intentional but incomprehensible. I started feeling a strange anxiety during the silence, like I was missing something important, like the world outside the bubble of quiet was moving on without me. I tried putting the stone in a drawer, but found myself unconsciously reaching for it, needing that smooth, cool weight in my hand. Leaving it behind felt wrong. The silence seemed even more profound when the stone wasn't near, as if its absence amplified the effect before the whispers began. One afternoon, I was on a video call with my team. Mid-sentence, my colleague Sarah froze, her eyes wide. "Liam, I can't hear you anymore," she typed frantically into the chat. The others agreed. They could see my mouth moving on screen, but no sound was coming through. My audio input showed it was working fine. On my end, their voices had become distant, muffled whispers. The CalmStone was sitting right next to my laptop. I quickly slid it away, into my pocket. A few seconds later, Sarah gasped, "Okay, you're back." That was so weird. The silence wasn't just in my perception anymore. It was somehow interacting with technology, selectively muting things around the stone. That evening, I decided I'd had enough. The calming effect was long gone, replaced by a gnawing dread. I took the calm stone outside to the communal trash bins behind my building. As I held it over the open lid, the silence descended instantly, heavier than ever before. The usual city evening sounds, distant sirens, chatter from open windows, cars, vanished. And the whispering started, louder this time, swirling around my head, a chorus of unintelligible secrets. It felt cold, ancient, and possessive. My hand trembled. Part of me, terrifyingly, didn't want to let it go. It felt like discarding a piece of myself. But the invasive nature of the silence, the feeling of being listened to by the whispers, finally won. I dropped the stone into the bin. The sound of it clattering against other trash was abruptly, shockingly loud. All the ambient noise of the city rushed back in, almost painfully intense. The whispers stopped cold. Relief washed over me so strongly my knees felt weak. The next day, #CalmStoneRecall was trending. The company cited potential auditory side effects and urged immediate disposal. The internet moved on, chasing the next trend. But sometimes, late at night, when the building is quiet, I still experience moments of that heavy, pressing silence. It never lasts long, but it's there. And sometimes, just on the edge of hearing, I think I catch the faintest sibilant sh. I never found out what the calm stones really were, or what the whispers wanted. I just know they spread fast, offered quiet, and tried to take something more in return. And I worry about how many weren't thrown away. The house without locks. I should have known something was wrong from the start. The rent was so low it felt like a typo, a number missing a zero. The landlord, a shifty guy who avoided eye contact, mumbled something about the previous tenants leaving in a hurry. The weirdest part? None of the doors inside or out had locks. Not broken locks, just, none. Smooth wood where the mechanism should be. He claimed they used heavy doorstops, giant wedges of wood, and that it was just a quirk of the place. Being a locksmith by trade, I wasn't too worried. Annoyed, maybe, but fixable. I needed a cheap place fast, and the house itself, a small, single-story bungalow with a tired-looking yard, seemed harmless enough. Still, walking through it the first time, it felt hollow. Not just empty, but like the air itself was thin and used up. I noticed scuff marks on the floors and faint scratches on the walls near the doorframes, right where a doorknob might hit if swung open too hard. I brushed it off as wear and tear. My first night, I didn't even unpack much. I went straight to work, installing brand new, high-quality deadbolts on the front door, the back door, my bedroom door, and the kitchen door leading outside. I tested each one meticulously. The satisfying click of the bolt sliding home felt like I was claiming the space, making it secure. Finally, exhausted, I locked everything tight and crashed on an air mattress in the living room. That was the only peaceful night I had. When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through the front window. And the front door was wide open. My blood ran cold. I jumped up, heart hammering against my ribs. I checked the door, the lock I'd installed was pristine, undamaged, but turned to the unlocked position. Then I saw the back door was ajar. The kitchen door too. And my bedroom door, standing open, revealing the empty room. Every single lock I had installed was unlocked. Panic started clawing at my throat. I checked outside, no footprints on the dew-covered grass, no sign of forced entry anywhere. The locks themselves worked perfectly when I tested them again. It was as if someone had walked through the house with a master key for my newly installed locks, unlocking them all, and then just left. My logical locksmith brain fought against the rising fear. Maybe I was overtired. Did I forget to lock them after testing? All 4 of them? It seemed impossible, but it was the only rational explanation I could cling to. I spent the day at work, distracted and jumpy. Before leaving that morning, I relocked everything, double-checking each one. That night, I got home, checked the locks, still secure. Relief washed over me, brief but potent. I made dinner, watched some TV, and decided on an early night, still drained from the move and the lingering unease. Before bed, I did a final sweep. Front door, locked. Kitchen door, locked. Back door, locked. Bedroom door, locked. The clicks were reassuring. Around 2 a.m., a sound jolted me awake. A soft click. I sat bolt upright in bed, straining my ears in the thick darkness. Silence. Then, another click, closer this time. It sounded like it came from the hallway, near the kitchen. My mouth went dry. I swung my legs out of bed, feet hitting the cold floor. As I crept towards the doorway, I heard it again, the faint, unmistakable sound of a deadbolt turning. I grabbed the heavy flashlight I keep by the bed and flicked it on, stepping into the hallway. The kitchen door was slightly open. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty doorway and the backyard beyond. Nothing. No one. The lock was intact, still shiny and new, but unlocked. I slammed it shut and twisted the deadbolt, the thunk echoing too loudly. Then I checked the others. Back door, unlocked. Front door, unlocked. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't a malfunction. Something had opened these doors. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat on the edge of my bed until dawn, flashlight in hand, listening to every creak of the old house. The next day, I almost called the landlord to break the lease, but I couldn't afford to move again so soon. Instead, I did the only other thing I could think of. I upgraded the locks again, using heavy-duty, pick-resistant models from my own workshop stock. I reinforced the door frames. If something wanted in, it would have to make a hell of a noise. Night 3. I forced myself through my routine, trying to pretend everything was normal. Lock check before bed, everything felt solid as a rock. I went to sleep, tense but determined. I woke up abruptly around 3 a.m. No sound this time, just an overwhelming sensation of being watched. Prickles ran up my spine. My eyes scanned the darkness of my bedroom. The door was closed, just as I'd left it. But the darkness around the door frame seemed wrong. Deeper. As my eyes adjusted, I saw it. A silhouette. Taller than the doorframe, thin, standing just outside my room, seeming to peer in through the crack. It wasn't distinct, more like a distortion in the air, a shape made of shadow. My breath hitched. I felt frozen, adrenaline dumping into my system, making me lightheaded. With a surge of terrified energy, I lunged for the bedside lamp and flicked it on. The silhouette vanished instantly. Heart pounding fit to burst, I threw open my bedroom door. The hallway was empty. But every other door in the house, front, back, kitchen, stood wide open, swinging gently in a non-existent breeze. That was it for me. I didn't even try to rationalize it anymore. How could anyone, or anything, bypass reinforced locks on 4 separate doors without making a sound, without leaving a mark? The landlord's vague talk of doorstops suddenly felt sinister. Why were there no locks originally? What were they trying to keep in, or out? Or perhaps, what were they trying to let move freely? I didn't wait for morning. I threw some clothes and my tools into a bag, grabbed my keys, and walked out the wide-open front door. I didn't look back. I didn't call the landlord for my deposit. I just drove until the sun came up, checking my rearview mirror every few minutes. I still work as a locksmith. But now, every time I install a deadbolt, every time I hear that click, a little bit of that cold dread creeps back in. I think about that hollow-feeling house, the scratches on the walls, the silhouette in the dark, and the impossible locks that wouldn't stay locked. And I wonder what happened after I left, and if the doors are still standing open. The armchair in the attic. The attic wasn't listed in the rental agreement. The landlord, old Mr. Henderson, just waved a dismissive hand when I asked during the walkthrough. Storage, mostly, he'd mumbled, haven't been up there in years. Door sticks. He was right about the sticking door. It took a solid shoulder shove on my third day living there to get it open, releasing a cloud of thick, cloying dust that smelled like dry paper and forgotten things. I'd moved into the narrow, slightly tilted house because it was all I could afford after leaving my old life behind. I just needed a quiet space to paint. The attic, once I wrestled the door open, was surprisingly large, running the length of the house under the low, sloped roof. A single grimy window at the far end let in a weak shaft of afternoon light, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was crammed with the usual attic debris, stacked boxes yellowed with age, rolled up rugs, a headless dressmaker's dummy leaning sadly in a corner. And the armchair. It sat near the center, draped in a dusty white sheet that did little to hide its bulky shape. Curiosity piqued, I pulled the sheet off. It was an old wingback chair, upholstered in a faded, deep green velvet that looked almost black in the dim light. The wood trim along the arms and feet was dark and ornately carved, though scratched and dull. It looked heavy, solid, out of place amongst the lighter clutter. I ran a hand over the velvet. It was surprisingly soft beneath the layer of dust, but cold to the touch, colder than the surrounding air. I dismissed it as just the nature of old fabric in a drafty attic. Still, something about it felt watchful. I shook the feeling off. Attics are inherently creepy places. But I couldn't stop thinking about the chair. It seemed a shame to leave such a potentially beautiful piece up there to rot. That evening, after much straining and awkward maneuvering down the narrow attic stairs, I managed to get it into my small living room. It dominated the space, but once I wiped it down, the deep green velvet seemed to almost glow richness in the lamplight. It needed work, the springs creaked, and there was a faint musty smell, but I felt a strange sense of satisfaction having rescued it. I sat in it that night, reading a book. It was comfortable, enveloping. The high back muffled the sounds from the rest of the house. I remember feeling unusually tired and dozed off right there. That's when the first odd thing happened. I woke up suddenly, unsure why. The room was dark except for the streetlights outside. I felt stiff from sleeping in the chair. As I stood up, I heard it, a soft, drawn-out sigh, seeming to come from right behind me, from the chair itself. I froze, every muscle tensing. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. Silence. Just the normal nighttime creaks of an old house settling. I convinced myself I'd imagined it, maybe a sigh in my sleep, or the wind outside. But the air around the chair felt heavy, still. The next few days were normal. I painted, I explored the small town, I started feeling more at home. I even used the armchair regularly, it was surprisingly cozy. But then came the sounds. Late at night, usually after midnight, I'd hear faint noises from the living room when I was in bed. A soft creak of springs, like someone shifting their weight. A rustle of fabric. Once, a sound like fingernails lightly tapping on the wooden armrest. Each time, I'd get up, heart pounding, and check. The living room would be empty. The chair would be still, silent under the moonlight filtering through the window. But sometimes the seat cushion looked slightly indented, as if someone had just gotten up. The impression would fade quickly, leaving me questioning my own eyes. I started avoiding the chair after dark. During the day, it was just furniture. Old, slightly smelly furniture. But at night, it felt different. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger now, localized entirely to that corner of the living room. One night, I couldn't stand the suspense. I decided to stay up, hidden in the doorway of the kitchen, just watching the living room. I turned off all the lights except for a dim lamp on the far side of the room, casting long shadows. The armchair sat there, a dark, hulking shape. Hours passed. The house was silent except for the refrigerator's hum. My eyes grew heavy. Then, around 3 a.m., I saw it. The indentation appeared on the seat cushion, slowly, deliberately, as if an invisible weight was settling down. The velvet seemed to tighten. The springs gave a low, protracted creak. I held my breath, unable to move, my blood turning to ice water. I was watching an empty chair being sat in. Then, the armrest depressed slightly, accompanied by another faint creak. It stayed that way for a long minute, the cushion deeply pressed down. I could almost feel a presence in the room, a stillness that wasn't empty. My skin crawled. Just as suddenly as it began, the cushion slowly rose back to its normal shape. The creak stopped. The feeling of presence lessened, though it didn't vanish entirely. I stayed frozen in the doorway for I don't know how long before backing slowly into the kitchen, my legs trembling. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I decided I had to get rid of it. I couldn't live with that. But when I went to move it, something felt wrong. The chair seemed heavier, impossibly heavier than when I brought it down. I strained, pulling with all my might, but could only drag it an inch or two across the floorboards. It felt anchored. As I struggled, I heard a low groan, not from the springs this time, but deeper, seeming to come from the very frame of the chair. And the air grew noticeably colder around it. Fear, sharp and real, finally overwhelmed my practicality. I gave up trying to move it. I threw the dusty sheet back over it, tucking it tightly around the base. Out of sight, maybe out of mind. But it wasn't. That night, even with the sheet covering it, I heard the creaks again. And something else, a faint, rhythmic tapping from beneath the sheet, coming from the seat. Tap. 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 Slow, deliberate, insistent. I didn't check. I locked my bedroom door, something I hadn't done before, and wedged a chair under the knob. I still heard it, muffled, through the door. Tap. 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 I haven't uncovered the armchair since. It sits in my living room, a shrouded monument to my fear. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the creaks, the sighs, the tapping. I don't sleep well. I avoid the living room after dark. My landlord, Mr. Henderson, hasn't been back, and I haven't told him. What would I say? The worst part? Sometimes, during the day, when the sun hits the sheet just right, I think I can almost see the shape of the indentation in the cushion beneath the fabric. As if something is still sitting there, patiently, waiting under the shroud. Waiting for me to lift the sheet again. The house on Barren Hill. I needed peace. Not the temporary kind you steal between phone calls or traffic jams, but deep, uninterrupted quiet. My research on localized atmospheric anomalies, pockets of unexplained phenomena, demanded focus, and the old house seemed perfect. It stood alone atop a barren hill, miles from the nearest town, a forgotten silhouette against the wide sky. Its age and isolation didn't bother me, they were the selling points. I arrived late afternoon, the wind whipping dust devils across the rough dirt driveway. The house loomed larger than I'd expected, paint peeling like sunburned skin, some windows boarded over, cracked spiderwebbing near the foundation. An uneasiness prickled at me, but I pushed it down. Old houses have character, I told myself, they settle and groan. Inside, the air hung thick and stale. Dust motes danced in the weak light slanting through the grimy windows. Wooden floors creaked beneath my boots. I dropped my bags by the stairs, the silence amplifying the sound. My plan was simple: set up my laptop and notes upstairs, work during the day, and soak in the quiet at night. The first oddity happened that evening. As I unpacked books in the living room, the lights flickered, old wiring, I assumed. Then, a faint whisper, like breath against my ear, seemed to emanate from the wall behind me. I froze, straining to hear. It wasn't menacing, just there. A murmur too soft to decipher. I blamed the wind whistling through unseen cracks and forced myself to ignore the goosebumps rising on my arms. I chose an upstairs room at the end of the hall for my workspace. It had a large window overlooking the desolate hill. That night, sleep was elusive. The whispers returned, seeming to drift from wall to wall, sometimes skittering across the ceiling. I'd catch fragments, maybe a syllable that sounded familiar, but never enough to understand. A chill settled deep in my chest, and I pulled the thin blanket tighter, my eyes scanning the darkness until exhaustion claimed me. The next morning, determined to shake off the unease, I explored. Old houses often have quirks, hidden spaces. Behind a heavy, immovable-looking cabinet on the first floor, I noticed a slight gap in the wall paneling. Curiosity overriding caution, I nudged the cabinet. It shifted with surprising ease, revealing a narrow, dark opening. A damp, earthy smell seeped out. My flashlight beam cut into the darkness, revealing a passage walled with rough stone. Strange symbols, faded circles crossed with lines, were painted near the entrance. Hesitantly, I stepped inside. The air grew heavy, pressing on my ears. My footsteps echoed unnervingly. After a few yards, the corridor branched. One path turned sharply right, the other sloped downwards. I chose the downward path, the air growing colder. The whispering started again, this time seeming to come from just behind my shoulder. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the empty passage. Nothing. My heart hammered against my ribs. Further down, the whispering intensified, still indistinct but closer. I felt a drop of water hit my shoulder. Looking up, I saw only oppressive darkness, but I had the distinct, terrifying feeling of being watched. My hands trembled. This was too much for the first full day. I turned back, the sense of being followed clinging to me like a shroud. Faint, echoing footsteps seemed to match my pace, stopping when I stopped. I practically threw myself out of the opening, shoving the cabinet back into place, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Later, I found the house blueprints in a dusty drawer. They showed no hidden corridors. Over the next week, I tried to focus on my research, but the house wouldn't let me. Lights flickered constantly. Whispers became a near-constant companion, sometimes sounding like my name, uttered softly, questioningly. Fleeting movements danced at the edge of my vision, a shadow darting past a doorway, a ripple in a curtain when there was no breeze. Driven by a morbid curiosity I couldn't explain, I searched for more hidden entrances. I found one behind a loose panel upstairs, leading down a narrow flight of stairs squeezed between walls. At the bottom, another cramped corridor, more symbols etched into the stone. It led to a small, low-ceilinged room containing only an old wooden table. On it lay brittle pages covered in the same symbols and diagrams that looked like arcane instructions. My flashlight flickered. The shadows seemed to deepen. A presence, cold and immense, pressed in behind me. I felt a breath against my neck, colder than the damp air. Panic seized me. I scrambled back, slipping on the slick floor, catching myself on the doorframe before bolting back up the stairs, my heart threatening to burst. I realized then the house wasn't just haunted, it had an agenda. It wanted me to find these passages, these symbols, these remnants of forgotten rituals. It wasn't trying to scare me away, it was trying to draw me in. The whispers started sounding less like random noise and more like pleading, urgent calls for help, or perhaps, for partnership. I discovered more openings, behind floorboards, inside closets, revealing a labyrinth winding through the bones of the house. Some passages led to dead ends, others to small, empty chambers, still others to ladders ascending or descending into further unknown depths. I started spending more time in the corridors than in the actual rooms, flashlight in hand, compelled to map this hidden architecture, despite the constant, nerve-shredding fear. I lost track of days. My research notes lay untouched. One evening, the power died completely. Sitting in the candlelit living room, the whispers intensified, weaving my name into their fabric, over and over, soft, insistent, almost welcoming. "Come," they seemed to say. "Join us. Understand." My mind screamed at me to pack my car and leave, to drive until the house was a speck in the rearview mirror. But another part of me, a part the house had cultivated, felt rooted. I wasn't just a researcher anymore. The house didn't want a victim, it wanted an initiate, someone to understand its secrets and, perhaps, to keep them. I'm writing this now by candlelight, deep within one of the hidden passages. The air is cold, the stone rough against my back. The whispers are calmer now, almost grateful. My hands shake as I write, my stomach is a tight knot of fear, but I'm not leaving. I feel the house around me, breathing, watching, waiting. It has shown me glimpses of things I can't explain, things tied to the symbols and the stale air. I feel like I'm part of its structure now, another secret held within its walls. I will keep exploring. I have to. The house demands it. And I will tell no one. The silence is part of the pact. My heart races, but I don't run. This is where I am now. Lost, terrified, but strangely, exactly where this house wants me to be. The footprints in the plaster. It wasn't dampness, not exactly. The water stains on the ceiling were old news, something the landlord had vaguely promised to fix. This was different. It started subtly, maybe 3 nights after I moved into the cheap, 4th-floor apartment near my downtown office. I'd taken the place because it was convenient and furnished, ignoring the slightly crooked closet door and the faint smell of stale laundry clinging to the sofa. Old buildings have quirks, I reasoned. The first odd thing was the footsteps. Late at night, I'd hear slow, heavy steps in the hallway outside my door. They'd approach, stop right outside, and then, silence. Each time I checked, the hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed, the doors of the other units were closed. I asked my neighbors across the hall, an elderly couple. Had they heard footsteps? No. I mentioned the unit next to mine. "Oh, that one's been empty for months," the man told me, peering through the crack in his door. "Rent's too high for this old place." That made the footsteps unnerving. But then came the scratching. On the 3rd night, after the familiar footsteps paused outside, I heard a faint scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across drywall. It seemed to come from the wall behind my headboard. My mouth went dry. I got up, heart pounding, and pressed my ear to the wall. Silence. I ran my hand over the painted surface. It felt solid, cool. The next morning, inspecting the wall in daylight, I noticed them, tiny, hairline cracks near the ceiling. They weren't random, they formed faint, branching outlines, vaguely reminiscent of footprints. Small, bare footprints, pressed into the plaster from the other side. They were faint, easy to miss, but undeniably there. A chill snaked down my spine. I told myself it was just the building settling, weird patterns in the old plaster. But the sounds continued. Footsteps in the hall, stopping just outside. Soft scraping or tapping noises from within the walls, sometimes near the floor, sometimes high up near the ceiling. And more footprint-shaped cracks appeared. Near the kitchenette. Along the wall bordering the empty apartment. Near the bathroom door. Sometimes they looked like handprints, fingers splayed. They weren't deep, just these disturbing outlines etched into the surface, accompanied by tiny flakes of paint dust on the floor beneath them. I started feeling watched, constantly on edge. I'd be reading on the couch and hear a soft tap 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 from the corner. I'd be showering and hear a faint scratch from behind the tiles. I tried talking to the landlord again, mentioning the cracks looked like footprints. He brushed me off, blaming humidity and settling. He sounded impatient, eager to end the call. One night, around 2 a.m., I heard rhythmic knocking, soft but deliberate, coming from the wall shared with the vacant unit. Knock, knock knock, knock. It paused, then repeated. My breath hitched. Was someone in there? A squatter? But the door was locked, the neighbors insisted it was empty. I crept to the wall, flashlight aimed. The footprint cracks seemed to shimmer in the beam, the shadows playing tricks, making them look raised. I reached out, touching one outline. For a split second, I felt a faint vibration under my palm, like a distant tremor, before pulling my hand back as if burned. Panic began to set in. I started leaving lights on, sleeping fitfully on the sofa, my bedroom door open so I could watch the hallway. I considered moving out, but where would I go on such short notice? And how would I explain breaking the lease? My walls have footprints appearing from the inside. One Saturday, determined to get proof, I stayed up, hidden in the dim living room, phone camera ready, facing the wall with the most activity. Midnight brought the hallway footsteps. Then, the scraping inside the wall began, closer this time. I held my breath, flashlight beam fixed on the largest footprint crack near the baseboard. Then I saw it. The plaster around the footprint outline pulsed. It pushed outward, maybe half an inch, the paint flaking, before retracting. It was like something inside the wall was pressing against it, testing the barrier. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The shape pulsed again, a slow, deliberate pressure from within. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking, but by the time I aimed the camera, the wall was still. The cracks looked inert, just flaws in old plaster. I haven't slept properly since. The cracks multiply slowly. Sometimes I find fresh paint dust. The scratching and tapping continue, intermittent, unpredictable. It doesn't feel aggressive, not yet. It feels like something, existing, just beyond the thin barrier of the wall. Something moving within the structure of the building itself, leaving its traces like ghostly fossils in the plaster. I walk around my own apartment feeling like I'm sharing it. Every creak, every tap sends my heart racing. I keep my phone close, the number for emergency services ready, but I haven't called. How do you report footprints manifesting in your walls? Right now, it's late. The lights are on. I'm sitting on the edge of my couch, staring at the wall opposite. My skin prickles. I just heard a faint, rhythmic tap, tap, tap from behind the plaster near the floor. It knows I'm listening. It's there. Moving. Waiting. And I'm trapped here, living inches away from whatever leaves its chilling impressions on the other side. The glitch in the glass. It started subtly. So subtly, I thought I was just tired. You know how you catch your reflection in a window or a mirror, just a quick glance. That's all it was. But one evening, walking past the hallway mirror, I stopped. I blinked, but in the glass, my reflection's eyes seemed to close a fraction of a second after mine opened. I shook my head, dismissed it. Too little sleep, too much screen time. But it happened again the next day, in the bathroom mirror. Blink. Pause. Blink. My reflection was lagging, just my eyes. I tested it, waved my hand, tilted my head, everything else was perfectly synchronized. Only the blink was off. It was small, but it burrowed under my skin. Over the next week, it got weirder. Sometimes, I'd glance at my reflection in the darkened TV screen after turning it off, and its head would be tilted slightly, even though I was sitting perfectly straight. Or I'd see its lips parted in a faint O shape in the microwave door glass when my own mouth was firmly closed. Tiny, momentary discrepancies. Easy to ignore, easy to rationalize. Until the smile. I was washing my hands, looking down. When I looked up at the bathroom mirror, I wasn't smiling. My reflection was. Not a huge grin, just a small, knowing curve of the lips that wasn't mine. It lasted only a second before snapping back to match my own shocked expression, but I saw it. My heart hammered against my ribs, cold dread washing over me. I started avoiding mirrors. I covered the one in the hallway with a scarf. I'd turn away from shop windows. I brushed my teeth staring at the sink basin. But it was like knowing there's a spider in the room, even if you can't see it, you feel it. I felt watched, especially near reflective surfaces. One night, I couldn't stand the avoidance anymore. I needed to know if I was losing my mind. I stood in front of the covered hallway mirror, took a deep breath, and pulled the scarf away. My reflection stared back, perfectly normal. Same tired eyes, same tense posture. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing. I let out a shaky sigh of relief, feeling foolish. Then, my reflection slowly, deliberately, raised one hand and waved. My own hands were clenched at my sides. I stumbled back, hitting the opposite wall, my breath catching in my throat. The reflection's expression didn't change, it just held that wave for a second longer before its hand dropped, perfectly mirroring my own motionless stance once more. I didn't cover the mirror again. What was the point? It knew I knew. Now, every reflection is a source of low-level panic. Is it just me in the glass? Or is it the other me, the one that lags, the one that smiles, the one that waves? Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I think I hear a faint whisper, like dry leaves skittering across glass. It almost sounds like my name. I don't know what it wants, or why it chose me. I just know that sometimes, when I look in the mirror, it feels like I'm not the only one looking back. And I'm starting to wonder, which one of us is the real reflection? The pattern on the ceiling. It started with a single, faint crack above my bed. Just a hairline fracture in the old plaster. I live in an older apartment building, so I figured it was just the place settling. I didn't think much of it for the first few days. Then, I noticed another small crack branching off from the first. And a day later, another. They weren't spreading randomly, they seemed to be forming a sort of jagged line, heading towards the center of the ceiling. Still, I told myself it was just old plaster doing what old plaster does. The feeling that something was wrong began about a week later. I was lying in bed, reading before turning off the light, when I glanced up. The pattern of cracks looked different. Sharper, somehow. More deliberate. It wasn't just random lines anymore, it was starting to look like interconnected angles, almost geometric, but with no symmetry I could recognize. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I got out of bed and stood on a chair to get a closer look, tracing the lines with my finger. The plaster felt solid, cold. That night, I heard it for the first time, a faint, dry scraping sound. It seemed to come from the ceiling, right above where the pattern was. It was soft, like sandpaper on wood, and intermittent. I turned my light back on, heart pounding, but the ceiling looked exactly the same. The sound stopped. Over the next few days, the pattern grew. More tiny cracks appeared, connecting to the main shape, making it more complex. It didn't look like any symbol I knew. It looked like something ancient and wrong. And the scraping sound returned each night, always soft, always stopping the moment I focused light or attention directly on the ceiling. I started losing sleep. I'd lie awake, staring into the darkness above, imagining those cracks spreading, imagining what was making that sound just inches above my head. I tried sleeping on the couch, but the thought of what might be happening to my bedroom ceiling while I wasn't there kept pulling me back. One morning, I woke up with a gasp. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the ceiling clearly. The pattern had changed drastically overnight. It was larger, more intricate, and in the center, where the lines converged, there was something new. It looked disturbingly like footprints. Tiny, oddly shaped footprints etched into the plaster, leading out from the central point and trailing towards the wall. My breath hitched. I scrambled out of bed, feeling dizzy. Footprints. On my ceiling. They weren't deep, just faint outlines, but they were undeniably there. And the scraping sound from the night before suddenly felt terrifyingly purposeful. I called my landlord. I tried to sound calm, just mentioning some unusual cracks appearing rapidly. He sent a maintenance guy over who glanced up, shrugged, said it was probably water damage from the apartment above, even though there were no stains, patched the most obvious cracks with some spackle, and left. That night, the scraping was louder. And when I woke the next morning, the spackle was gone, flaked onto my floor like dry snow. The footprints were back, clearer than before, and there were more of them, trailing further across the ceiling. Now, I sleep with the lights on. It doesn't stop the scraping. It doesn't stop the pattern from changing almost imperceptibly each day. Sometimes, I feel like I'm being watched from above. When I lie very still, I can almost feel a pressure, a weight, concentrating on the ceiling directly over my bed. I don't know what the pattern means or what's making the footprints. I don't know what's scraping just beyond the plaster. All I know is that every night, I lie awake staring up at it, feeling the cold dread seep into my bones, wondering when those tiny footprints will reach the wall, and start coming down. The static on the line. It started about 2 weeks ago. My landline phone rang, which is weird enough, who even calls landlines anymore? I picked it up, expecting a telemarketer or maybe a wrong number. Hello. Silence. Not complete silence, though. There was a low, fuzzy static on the line. Like listening through water, or the sound an old TV channel used to make when it went off the air. Hello. I repeated, louder. Just the static. It felt thick. Heavy. After a few more seconds, I hung up, figuring it was just a bad connection or a pocket dial from somewhere. But it rang again the next evening. Same time, almost to the minute. I answered. Same heavy, fuzzy static. No voice, no clicks, just that oppressive sound. This time, I stayed on the line longer, maybe 30 seconds, listening intently. There was nothing within the static, but the static itself felt wrong. Like it was intentional. I hung up again, a little prickle of unease on my neck. It became a daily occurrence. Every evening, between 7:15 and 7:20 p.m., the landline would ring. Always, unknown caller, on the ID. Always that same, thick static. I started letting it go to the answering machine, but it never left a message. The machine would just record 30 seconds of that dense static before cutting off. Deleting those messages felt strange. It wasn't just noise, listening to the playback gave me a headache, a dull pressure behind my eyes. I tried unplugging the phone for a few nights. Peace. But the silence felt wrong too, like I was just delaying it. When I plugged it back in a few days later, it rang that evening, right on schedule. Static. Then, things shifted slightly. One night, I was cooking dinner when it rang. I ignored it. But as I moved around the kitchen, chopping vegetables, I felt like the static on the unheard line was following my movements. It's impossible, I know. But the feeling was intense, like whatever was generating that sound was somehow aware of me, tracking me through the walls. My hand slipped with the knife, nearly cutting my finger. I stopped answering. I stopped listening to the messages. But I couldn't stop knowing it was happening. That specific time slot every evening became filled with dread. My shoulders would tense up around 7 p.m. I'd find myself holding my breath, waiting for the ring that inevitably came. Last night was different. I was tired of the dread, tired of the waiting. When it rang at 7:17 p.m., I snatched the receiver. What do you want? I didn't shout, but my voice was tight. The static pulsed. Just once. It got slightly louder, sharper, for less than a second, then settled back into its thick, fuzzy drone. It was a reaction. It heard me. I slammed the phone down, my hand shaking. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. It wasn't just a bad connection. It wasn't random. Something, somewhere, was deliberately sending this sound to my phone, every single night. It was listening. It had reacted. The phone is sitting across the room now. It's almost 7 p.m. The silence in my apartment feels heavy, charged. I keep glancing at the phone, imagining the wires humming, imagining that thick static gathering somewhere, waiting to pour through the line. Waiting for 7:15. I don't know what happens if I don't hang up. I don't know what it is. I just know it calls every night, and the sound it makes isn't empty. It feels like it's waiting for something. And I'm terrified I might eventually find out what. The little wooden box. It started innocently enough. I found the little wooden box at a dusty flea market, tucked between chipped teacups and faded postcards. It was plain, dark wood, no carvings, no lock, just a simple, smooth cube maybe 4 inches across. Something about its unassuming nature pulled me in. It felt cool and solid in my hand. I bought it for a few dollars, thinking it would be a nice, unobtrusive place to keep stray buttons or loose change on my nightstand. I live alone. My apartment is small but usually feels safe, until the box arrived. The first morning after buying it, I noticed the lid was slightly ajar. I distinctly remembered closing it flush the night before. Shrugging it off, I pushed it shut and went to work. The next morning, the lid was open again. Inside, nestled on the bare wood bottom, was a single, tiny, dried wildflower, the same kind I'd idly picked from a crack in the sidewalk the previous afternoon and then forgotten about, letting it drop from my fingers a block later. My stomach did a slow, cold flip. How? It had to be a coincidence. Maybe a petal had stuck to my clothes. But this was a whole, perfectly preserved flower head. I threw it away, closed the box firmly, and tried not to think about it. But the next day, there was something else inside, a small, smooth, gray pebble, almost perfectly round. I remembered holding one just like it the day before, found while waiting for the bus, turning it over and over in my palm to soothe my nerves before a stressful meeting, then slipping it back into my coat pocket. I checked the pocket, it was empty. The air in my bedroom felt suddenly colder. I slammed the box shut, my hand trembling slightly. This wasn't coincidence. From then on, it was a daily occurrence. Every morning, the box contained a small token from the previous day, specifically from a moment I thought was private or insignificant. A shred of blue thread identical to one that snagged off my sweater unnoticed. A single, iridescent fish scale, likely from the brief moment I paused by the pet store window. A perfectly formed teardrop-shaped salt crystal the morning after I'd cried silently over a sad movie. These weren't just objects, they were echoes of my hidden moments, my fleeting thoughts, my unwitnessed anxieties. The box wasn't just storing things, it felt like it was collecting pieces of me. Fear began to curdle in my gut. I moved the box to the living room bookshelf. The next morning, it was back on my nightstand, lid slightly open, containing a tiny, tightly folded corner torn from a page of the book I'd been reading in bed. I tried locking it in a drawer. It reappeared on my desk. I tried hiding it in the back of my closet, under a pile of old sweaters. I found it sitting squarely on my pillow, lid invitingly open, holding a single, long strand of my own hair, tied in an impossibly intricate knot. My apartment stopped feeling safe. I felt constantly watched, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I started sleeping with the lights on. I jumped at every creak and groan of the building. I'd find myself staring at the box, expecting it to move, expecting something. Sometimes, late at night, I thought I heard the faintest scratching sound coming from inside it, like tiny claws on dry wood. I had to get rid of it. One Saturday, filled with a desperate surge of courage, I took the box outside. I walked blocks away to a public park trash can and buried it deep under sticky wrappers and coffee cups. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. I practically ran back to my apartment, locking the door behind me, my heart pounding with frantic hope. That night, I slept more deeply than I had in weeks. I woke up slowly, the room filled with pale morning light. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then, a cold dread seeped into my bones. I turned my head slowly towards the nightstand. The little wooden box was there. The lid was wide open. Inside, resting on the dark wood, was nothing I recognized from the day before. It was a single, smooth, perfectly white bird feather. I hadn't seen a white bird. I hadn't thought about feathers. I didn't understand. Then I remembered the dream I'd had, a vague, fleeting dream about flying, about feeling weightless and free for just a moment before falling. A dream I hadn't told anyone, that I'd barely remembered myself until now. The box knew. It didn't just collect my actions or my waking thoughts. It collected everything. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the feather in the box, the silence of the room pressing in on me. It wasn't going away. It would always be there, silently gathering the fragments of my life, my fears, my dreams. It knew me better than I knew myself. And the worst part? I had invited it in. It was mine now. Forever. The painting from Cousin Maeve. It arrived rolled up in brown paper, tied with twine that crumbled when I touched it. A note tucked under the string just said, "From Cousin Maeve." Found in her attic. I barely knew Cousin Maeve, some distant relative who'd passed away months ago. Curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a painting. Not large, maybe 2 feet by 3. It was a landscape, but unsettling. Twisted, skeletal trees clawed at a sky bruised purple and gray. No signs of life, just dead branches and heavy, swirling clouds that seemed wrong. There was no signature. Still, needing something for the bare wall in my apartment hallway, I hung it up that evening. The first odd thing happened maybe an hour later. I was walking past the hallway, heading to the kitchen, and I heard a low sound, like a sigh or a drawn-out moan. I stopped, listening. My apartment building is old, full of creaks and groans, but this felt different. Closer. I peered into the hallway. The painting hung still. I shook my head, blaming tired ears, and moved on. Over the next few days, I kept glancing at it. I couldn't help it. Did that big, gnarled tree on the left always lean quite so much? Were the clouds always gathered so thickly in that corner? I told myself it was tricks of the light, the way shadows fell in the narrow hall. Then came the whispers. Late one night, reading on the couch, I heard it distinctly, my name, breathed softly, sounding like it came from right down the hall. My blood ran cold. I muted the TV, heart pounding. Silence. I forced myself up, phone flashlight on, and went to the hallway. The painting looked back at me, dark and inert. But as I shone the light on it, I could have sworn the paint around the base of the trees shimmered, like wet fog swirling. Sleep didn't come easy after that. I started noticing more changes. The trees in the background seemed marginally closer each morning. The purple in the sky deepened, becoming almost black in places. One afternoon, I touched the canvas hesitantly. It felt strangely warm, not cold like paint on canvas should. I snatched my hand back, a jolt like static electricity shooting up my arm. Panic began to set in. I tried covering the painting with a spare sheet, thinking out of sight, out of mind. But that night, the sounds were worse. The moaning felt louder, more insistent, muffled beneath the fabric. And the whispers, they felt like they were right beside my ear, even when I was in my bedroom with the door closed. I couldn't take it anymore. Around 3 a.m., I stormed into the hallway and ripped the sheet off. The painting seemed to pulse. The fog around the tree trunks was definitely moving now, coiling like smoke. And deep within the murky clouds, I thought I saw faint shapes, suggestions of faces, thin and gaunt, with empty sockets staring out. My name whispered again, seeming to echo from within the painted landscape itself. I wanted to destroy it, burn it, tear it apart. But I was frozen by a primal fear mixed with a terrifying curiosity. What was this thing? What did it want? The next morning, I took it down. My hands shook as I handled the frame. I didn't throw it out. Instead, I carried it to my living room and placed it face down on the floor, hiding the scene. It's been there for 3 days now. Face down. But it's not quiet. Sometimes, especially late at night, I hear it, a soft, scraping sound from that corner of the living room. Like fingernails dragging lightly across the floorboards. Like it's trying to turn itself over. I don't know what to do. I feel it in the room, even when I can't see it. A heavy, watchful presence. I can't bring myself to touch it again, let alone get rid of it. It came from family, didn't it? What if getting rid of it is worse? All I know is that the painting isn't just paint on canvas. It's alive, in some horrible way. And I think it's waiting. Face down on my living room floor, it's just waiting. And listening. The armchair that remembered. I found it tucked away in the dusty corner of a sprawling antique mall, the kind of place that smells like old paper and forgotten memories. It was a wingback armchair, upholstered in a faded, deep green velvet that looked soft despite its age. The dark wood frame had elegant curves, slightly worn at the armrests. It just felt right. Perfect for the empty corner of my living room. The woman running the stall seemed almost relieved when I said I'd take it. Good, she'd muttered, barely meeting my eye. It's been here a while. Needs a home. I paid, loaded it awkwardly into my car, and didn't think much more about her reaction. Setting it up in my apartment, I admired how it filled the space. That first evening, I sank into it with a book. It was surprisingly comfortable, enveloping me. But as I settled, there was a faint, almost imperceptible shift beneath me, like the cushion was adjusting itself after I stopped moving. I shifted, thinking it was just old springs, but the feeling was oddly specific. A few days later, I came home from work and tossed my bag onto the couch. As I walked past the armchair, I stopped. There was a distinct impression in the velvet seat cushion, the shape of someone having been sitting there recently. Not just a general sag, but a clear indentation. I live alone. No one had been over. My heart gave a little jump. I reached out, the spot felt faintly warm to the touch. The warmth faded even as my fingers hovered over it. Okay, that's weird, I whispered, the silence of the apartment suddenly feeling heavier. I smoothed the velvet, telling myself it was just the way the fabric settled, maybe the light playing tricks. But it kept happening. Sometimes I'd walk into the room and see that telltale depression in the seat. Other times, I'd catch a faint scent hanging in the air around it, not exactly unpleasant, but old, like dried flowers and dust, maybe a hint of faded perfume. It was strongest when the room had been closed up for a while. Then came the sounds. Not loud bangs, but soft, intimate noises. A gentle creak of the wood frame when I wasn't even near it. A faint rustle of the velvet, like someone shifting their weight, heard only in the dead quiet of night. Sometimes, reading on the couch across the room, I'd glance over and swear the armchair sighed, a soft release of air that wasn't just the house settling. My skin would prickle. I started avoiding sitting in it. One Saturday, I decided it was making me uneasy enough that I should move it to the spare room. I gripped the worn wooden armrests. As I pulled, the chair didn't just scrape the floor, it emitted a low, groaning sound from deep within its frame, like stressed timber resisting. It felt heavier than it looked, unnaturally anchored. I strained, managing to drag it a few inches, the groan turning into a sharp crack that made me jump back, heart hammering. It felt stubborn. Almost defiant. I left it there, slightly askew, for the rest of the afternoon. When I came back into the living room later, intending to try again, it was back in its original position. Perfectly aligned with the corner, as if I'd never touched it. That's when the real fear started. Not just unease, but a cold dread. How? I checked the floor for scrape marks from it sliding back, nothing. It was just back. I stopped trying to move it. I tried to ignore it. But now, I felt watched whenever I was in the living room. My gaze would be pulled towards it. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a flicker of movement near the headrest, a shadow darker than the velvet, vanishing when I looked directly. The air around it often felt colder than the rest of the room. Last night was the worst. I woke up around 3 a.m., needing a glass of water. As I walked through the dark living room, guided only by the moonlight through the window, I saw it. Someone, or the shape of someone, was sitting in the armchair. It was a silhouette, slightly translucent, leaning back against the cushions, head tilted as if listening. I froze, unable to breathe, unable to scream. My legs wouldn't move. The shape didn't turn towards me, but I felt its attention, a heavy, ancient awareness. Then, slowly, it faded, melting back into the velvet until only the empty chair remained, bathed in moonlight. I didn't get water. I backed away slowly into my bedroom and locked the door, something I'd never done before. Today, the chair looks normal. Just an old piece of furniture in the corner. But I know what I saw. And I know what I feel. It remembers being sat in. It remembers its place in the room. Maybe it even remembers the person who sat there for years before me. And now, it's waiting. Waiting for me to sit down again, perhaps. Or waiting for something else entirely. I don't want to find out. But it's in my home, and I have no idea how to make it leave.